Hello, I'm Michelle Anderson, and I have been in the mortgage industry for 8 years, working with credit scores for investors. Today I'm here with Steve Page, who is a credit score expert. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I love talking about credit scores, and especially how that applies to investors. I've been working with scores since 1986, actually credit reports and credit scores since 1994.
Wow.
Credit scores are the key for investors. They're the number one tool for them to participate in all kinds of opportunities in making money.
Wonderful. So can you help us understand credit scores a little bit better?
We can. What we're going to talk today is all about how scores are, access to them, how to understand them, how to raise them. There's a big mystery out there about scores, and hopefully by the end of this segment that we can better understand what scores we want to look at, how we can monitor them, and basically how we can maintain them. Investors rely on scores and should rely on scores a lot.
Okay, and so since I work with investors nationwide, how would that apply to them?
Well, scores are what they call dynamic. That means that they don't maintain the same level of what you might thought they were a couple days ago. If you look at a score that you had 2 weeks ago, it can change today, and we refer to that as dynamic. Credit scores are pulled from what they call an ad hoc system, which means that whatever it is that day based on the information you have is what your score is. Sounds a little confusing, but it's really not that confusing. But we've got an easy way to understand them today.
Okay, so when I'm doing a mortgage and I pull a credit report and the credit score, it's going to change in between 30 days? Because usually there's a 30-day time frame where things are reporting.
You're right. Not all the time. Sometimes that scores are not to be relied on all the time. When someone comes to me and says they have a good credit score, my first question is, well, which one? Because there are three kinds of credit scores.
Right.
There's a lot of credit scores. There's 3 kinds that apply to investors, though.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that information, Steve. Steve, you've helped us understand credit scores a lot better. Can you help us with the history of the credit scores and get into the history of the credit bureaus?
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery about credit scores and credit bureaus. They're 2 separate institutions, actually. Credit bureaus started about 100 years ago, and credit scores were created in about 1954, to be exact. A guy named William Farrar and Earl Isaac take credit for creating what we refer to as our FICO score. Through lots of research and lots of data, they created what they call a regressional analysis system that's supposed to predict what we'll do in the future. And credit scores were created for bankers, not for us. They're created for us not to even look at. In fact, when they first became accessible to us back in the early 2000s, it was told that we wouldn't understand them and that it would be confusing to us. However, they were governing every decision we ever had to make with credit. And investors were at a disadvantage because they were always told that they either had good scores or low scores, but really couldn't see those scores.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit of why they created the credit bureaus?
Credit bureaus were created to just monitor people's spending habits from merchants. Merchants were very worried, as they are now, about who was getting credit, who was paying people back, and things like that. They wanted to automate the system and kind of streamline it back in 1954, as early as 1954, thinking that they could predict what people would do. And so they were adopted back in the mainstream of mortgages back in 1994 with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that accepted credit scores as being a predictable number that they could take a risk on. And it did streamline things. I'm sure in the industry you understand we refer to it as what, credit score driven?
Everything is credit score driven in the mortgage business.
And before that, it was just, what we refer to as judgmental analysis, where they sat around and looked at a credit report and determined what the likelihood of that person would be to pay back that loan.
Wonderful. Thank you for that information.
And one other thing you might want to know is credit scores predict how likely you are to be 90 days late over the next 24 months. That's really what they're looking at, how likely that person will pay back a loan on time over the next 24 months.
And they are pretty accurate, correct?
They are. There's a lot of gray areas there. Credit scores don't always define a person's ability to pay back a loan. We're going to talk today about all the different histories of why they vary, and people's credit histories are random sometimes as far as trying to predict what their score is going to be. There's three kinds of credit bureaus, as we can see here. I don't say three kinds, there's three companies that keep scores and keep credit reports on us. And they refer to as TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. The one that we have here, Dun & Bradstreet, is very old. That applies strictly to businesses. But nevertheless, these companies have changed names over the years. But currently, this is what we refer to as TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax.
And they all have a nickname as well.
Yeah. We have Experian used to be TRW. Equifax used to be called CBI. TransUnion's been around for a long time.
Right.
And they all three have separate credit scores. So when people say they have a FICO score, that applies strictly to Experian.
Correct.
They say they have a Beacon score, that applies to Equifax. If they say they have an Empirica score, that applies to TransUnion. So.
Wonderful.